In this first part on this Elementor multi-part series, I'm going to take you through the core fundamental skills to get you up from knowing nothing about Elementor to the point where you're comfortable building your first pages. So if this is interesting to you, join me and I'm going to take you through the entire process right now. So for this part of the tutorial, we're going to be creating something that looks very similar to this. As you can see, it's a nice, clean, simple design and a great starting point to get you up to speed. So first of all, let's just take a quick look at what we've got set up inside WordPress itself. So if we come over first of all into the appearance and into themes, you can see that the theme that I'm going to be using for this example is the Hello theme. Now first of all, I'm going to say the reason for this is because it is a bare bones theme that has pretty much just the things that WordPress needs to keep it happy. And then we can use Elementor and Elementor Pro to create all the different page design elements that we want. So in this tutorial, we're going to be using this, but however, if you wanted to use something else like GeneratePress, Ocean WP, Astra, and so on, you could use those, and all the skills you're going to learn in this series of videos should carry you over to pretty much whatever theme you want to use alongside Elementor and Elementor Pro. Next up, let's just jump over into the plugins section and see what plugins we currently have installed. So all I'm using is Elementor and Elementor Pro. That's all we need to install for this tutorial. Again, obviously you're probably going to find there's going to be additional plugins that you want to install to get your website up and running fully, things like SEO tools and so on. This is all about how you use Elementor and Elementor Pro. Okay, so we've seen what's installed. Let's take a look at the Elementor interface. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come in and create a new page. So we're going to add a new page and we're simply going to name this Home Page. This is just going to be the basis of our first page. We'll just click on Publish. And once you've done that, we're now ready to start working with Elementor itself. Now the thing to bear in mind is once you create a page, you still need to pull in Elementor to use it to create the page layout. Then everything else pretty much on the page is going to be ignored in favor of Elementor. So what we need to do is click on Edit with Elementor. That will open the editor up and we'll see the editor for the first time. So let's just take a quick look at the interface itself. If we look on the left hand side, we've got a selection of different widgets. Now if you're using just the free version of Elementor, you'll see a lot less options in here. You'll have all the basic options, you won't have Pro, but you will have some additional things like General and so on. So just bear in mind if you're using the free version, you can follow along with most of this tutorial, but you are going to find some of the options that we're going to be using won't be available in the free version. So widgets, what exactly are they? They're the fundamental building blocks that we create any kind of page design out of. Things like headings, images, videos, buttons, and so on. And then we put those into a grid layout. So what do I mean by a grid layout? If we take a look on our page at the moment, you can see we've got this serrated block that just says drag a widget here. If we drag a widget over, so let's just say we'll drag in this text editor, we'll drag that over, that's now a single row and a single column. If you want to split that column into two, so we can have two separate columns with different content in, we could do just that. All we need to do is come over this particular section and we're going to click on this little option in the top left hand corner, and I'll explain all these different options as we go through. All we can do is we can right click and we can just say add new column. And there's our second column. So we can come back onto our widgets if we want to, drag an image over and drop a placeholder image inside there. So we've now created a two columns with a single row layout. So as I said, everything is done in rows and columns. That's basically the fundamentals of it. Yes, you could override that with things like absolute positioning and so on, but that's a little bit beyond the basics of what I want to cover in this first video. So once you see that kind of thing, it's very, very easy. You start to see exactly how you can build these various different elements up, add different design aspects to it, and you can create very complex looking layouts, all using these simple building block tools. So next of all, let's take a quick look at the actual row and columns, these different icons and things that we've got available to us. If we choose this section, you can see we currently have three different icons. We've got add section, which will do exactly that, allow us to add another section above the current section. So we click, you can see that now pops up and says what kind of section do you want to add. We can add in a new section, so we can come in and we can choose from things like single row column, dual row column, triple, and so on. So we have pre-designed column layouts that we can tap into and use those if we want to. Alternatively, if we wanted to, we could also choose an option to add a template. Now we'll take a look at templates briefly a little later on, but they're just basically pre-designed layout pieces, pages, blocks, and so on. So again, like I say, we'll take a look at that in our dedicated section a little later in this video. So that's the first option. The next option is basically just the edit section. So if we click on that, doesn't matter what widget we may have selected. So if I just come over, click to edit this image, you'll see on the left hand side now, we've got edit image, and that's currently what this panel is going to do, allow us to edit the image. Whereas if we now come over this section, we can click on that, it now switches over to edit section, and we can edit all the parameters to do with that section itself. Finally, you've got the X, which is the delete section. So if we click on that, that will delete that section out of the page. We can, if we want to, undo anything. We come down to the bottom and we have a history option. So we can click on there, and all the different things we've done since the first edited stage are all listed inside there. So we can say we removed that. Let's just click back to the previous stage and you can see it brings it back. So we can very easily pull back anything we may have accidentally deleted, removed, moved, whatever we did. So now that we've seen how we can choose sections and edit those, duplicate those, delete those, and so on, let's take a look at each of these different columns. If we take a look, you can see each column has this little icon in the top left-hand corner. Depending upon which column you go to, you'll see that icon appear. If we click on that, you can see now on the left-hand side, the panel changes over, this time to edit column. So now if we make changes to that column, it only applies to that specific column. Any adjacent columns or any columns above or below or whatever in your design will not be affected by any changes you make. So for example, when we select this, we can just select this column and then we could adjust the vertical or the horizontal align. So you could come to the vertical, we could say middle, and you can see that now positions it directly inside the middle of that particular column. So it's very easy to set up the way you want to style various different things inside each of these columns, sections, and so on. Now, one other thing I want to draw your attention to is if we come down to the bottom left-hand side, we've also got another option called Navigator. And this can be very useful when you start to have more complex designs or longer designs that you want to move things around, select things, and all those kinds of different options. If we click on the Navigator, that will open up this section on the right-hand side. You can see it tells us exactly what's on our page. So you can see at the top, it now says section, which is what we've just inserted. If we click to expand that, we have the two columns, the left-hand column which has the text in it, the right-hand column which has the image in it. If we click to open up any of those columns, we can see exactly what widget is placed inside that column. We can, if we want to, move things around. So if we created additional sections, we can simply drag and drop things around. So if I open up this second column and I just grab this image, I can reposition that now above the text on the left-hand column, removing it from the right-hand column. If I want to put that back, I can simply drag that back down into the position I want it, and you can see it now updates in real time. So the Navigator can be something that's very, very useful when you're working on more complex designs, or you quickly want to move things around. You may want to sort of change section alignments, positions, and so on. Well, you could use this. It's also very useful because once you select anything inside the Navigator, the left-hand column changes over to all the options associated with that selected item. So if we come back to the section, you can see we now have edit section. If we come down to the column, it says edit column. If we come to the text editor, which is in the left-hand column, you can see edit text editor is now selected. So it's very quick and easy to jump around, find exactly what you want, and do all kinds of editing and all those kinds of good things. So the Navigator is absolutely your friend. So now that we've seen the various different ways we can select things, let's take a look at the actual options on the left-hand side. You can see we have three different tabs. We have content, we have style, and we have advanced. Now the content will change depending upon the type of widget you have selected. So if we select this text, we get this one lot of options. If we select the image, you can see we get different options. If we select the row itself, or the section itself, I should say, you can see we get different options again. So this is what's called context sensitive. It changes context and the options that are available depending upon what you currently have selected. The style option works in fundamentally the same way. This is how you can go through the process of styling whatever you have selected. So again, if we choose the text and we jump over to the styles, you can see we do things like adjust the alignment, the text color, the typography. If we jump into the advanced option, we have the options to do things like adjusting and setting margins, padding, the Z index. We can apply custom CSS IDs and classes. We have some more advanced options, things like motion effects. So if you were using Elementor Pro, you'll have access to things like entrance animations, and you can make things sticky, all those kinds of very useful things. Background, border, positioning, responsive, tons of really useful things available to you. So that's the basics of the editor that you'll see most of the time. The other thing we also have is the option to use responsive mode. Now, when you're working with Elementor, you can switch between 3 different modes. You can have desktop, tablet, and mobile. So if we click between any of these, you'll see we switch responsive mode. We can jump over to tablet. The screen will then shrink down and allow us to make edits to make sure that whatever we're creating and designing looks good on a tablet. And the same goes for mobile devices. We can click and we can edit things. So you can see where we've got things like the title or the logo at the top and the navigation. They're in a bit of a mess at the moment, so we'd want to tidy those up to make sure they looked great across all those key devices. So this is where it's very useful when you are working on creating a website and you want to check, see what it's going to look like and make changes. This is exactly how you do it inside the editor. So that's the basics of the editor. We do have some extra options as well. If we come down to the settings in the bottom left hand corner, we can click on there, and this opens up all the settings for the page that we're currently working on. So you can see at the moment the title for the page is the home page, which we set up when we created the page. We can adjust the status, so all the normal statuses you have as part of WordPress, draft, pending, review, and so on. We can assign a featured image if that's applicable to the design that you're working with, if it's a page or a post or so on. So if you want to use that, you can do that inside here. We can hide the title if we don't want that to display, so we can just click, that will hide the title from the page, and then that will allow us to create our own title and use that as part of the whole style setup inside Elementor itself. Finally, we have the page layout. You can see it says default, and when you've got Elementor installed, you have a couple of extra options. The Elementor canvas will basically take any header or footer templates you may have assigned as either part of your theme or as part of the actual theme builder which Elementor Pro has, which we will cover in a future video. And finally, you've got Elementor full width. This will leave all the element on the page, but it means you have full width control, so it'll go from the entire size of the screen, and then you can control exactly what will display and how it displays. For now, we'll leave this set at default. We've also got some options if we come to the top left hand corner to this little hamburger menu. We click and open that up. You can see we've got things like default colors, fonts, theme styles, global settings, and so on. If we open up something like global settings, you can see the default fallback font, the content width between the spaces between each of the widgets, all those kinds of useful things. We can also control exactly how a lightbox is used for our images and if we actually want to use a lightbox at all. Now, as we go through things and creating our website as part of this beginner's guide, we'll be taking a look at some of the options inside here and how we'd actually use them. Specifically, the theme style, which is a very powerful sort of recent addition to Elementor and Elementor Pro. It allows us to create global styles that we can apply to the entire site. And if we want to make changes, we can come back into one location and all those changes will ripple through the entire site. So we will be taking a look at that in depth as part of a future portion of this particular video. For now, just to know this is where we get the information from. So that really is the very basics of how the Elementor editor works. We're now going to take a look at how we can start to take some of the different elements we have and start to build out our first page. In this section, we're going to be taking a look at one of the key new features that's been added into Elementor in the recent months, and that's theme styles. What exactly are theme styles? As their name would suggest, it allows us to globally style lots of key elements for our design. So things like your headings, your body text, your forms, your buttons, your images, all those kinds of things. Then the nice thing is we can simply go and make a change to those theme styles and that will then filter down through the entire website for us. Now, before we go any further with theme styles, it's worth bearing in mind that they work best when you're using a bare bones theme like the Hello theme. And that's the key reason why I've chosen it for this tutorial. If you're intending to use a theme like Ocean WP or Astra, you may well find that it's easier and more consistent to control a lot of these things via the customizer. However, because this is all about Elementor and Elementor Pro, I want to show you how important theme styles can be. So the first thing we need to do before we can even start styling this is make sure that our settings are all configured correctly, so every change we make is all reflected throughout our entire site. So what we need to do is come back out of this, exit to our dashboard, go into the Elementor menu and into settings. Make sure that disable default colors and disable default fonts are both checked. Then we hit save changes. That means now that these theme styles we're going to create are going to make sure that they work throughout the entire site. Now we can just go back into any of our pages or posts, come back in and we're going to edit with Elementor and we're going to go back in and start configuring everything. Now, with this section set out, it means that I can style things and I can see exactly what's going to happen as I go through the styling process. So we come back over into our theme styles. That'll switch us over now into the theme style editor. As you can see, we've got a range of different tabs on the left hand side, and we can simply come into any of those, start configuring the various different options. So if we see we've got body, background, typography, all those kinds of things, we can configure all the different aspects. So the background is going to be the global background color for our entire site. So if we just change that to something else, so we're going to click and we can just say this red color, you can see now everything on the page, the background, has all been set up to be red, and every single page, unless we change that on a page level, would all have that red color set as the background. Let's just clear that and reset it, because obviously we don't want to put a red background in this design. It's going to look a little bit jarring. So we're going to leave the background type as it is for now. Come into typography, and from there we can now set up the basics. So the first thing we've got is the body, and that's going to relate to your normal paragraph text throughout your entire design. So we can, if we want to, adjust the typography in here. Now, one thing that's nice about Elementor is the typography controls are generally fairly good. Yes, we could do with some extra options inside there to get even more control, but for the most part and for most users, we've got everything we need. So if we open up the typography options, you can see inside there we can choose things like the font family, the size based upon the different types of devices. So if you remember back when I said we could take a look and open up the different responsive modes for tablets, desktops and mobiles, we can set different values inside there for each of those 3 different devices to make sure that our typography, for in this example, the body text, looks good across all those different devices. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the font family, adjust the weight, and just make some settings inside here and see how that reflects on our design. So let's start off by changing our font family. For this example, we're going to be using Quicksand, which is one of the free Google fonts. So I'm going to click on Quicksand, and you see now everything changes to display in Quicksand. That's because we've got basically a flow of all the different styles and things we set up. Right at the top, if we choose something like, for example, the body, all of the different fonts underneath that are going to take on Quicksand as being their font family. We can change that then through the heading options as we go through, and that's something we will take a look at doing next once we set up our body text. So just bear that in mind. The same goes if we set things like text color and so on as well. Okay, so now we've done that, let's just change some of the other values for this. We're going to set this font size to be 16 pixels. You can see we can adjust the size on there. We can come in and control it. We don't have to work in pixels either. We can, if we want to, work in pixels, ems, rems, or VW. So you can choose whatever format you want to work with. I'm going to stick to pixels for this example. This isn't about best practice. This is just about showing you the easy way of going through and setting things up. If you want to work on any of those other values, then by all means do it. The process is exactly the same. Next up, we've then got the weight, and the weight is basically how heavy the font looks. So for example, if we choose something like 900, you can see we get a very bold font, whereas if we choose something like 100, we get a very thin font. Now, even though we've got quite a lot of different values inside here, not every font is going to support that weight. So you may find that you change between some different values and nothing changes on the page. That's just because the font doesn't have all of those weights created for that particular font style. So just remember that if you wonder why you set a value and it may look the same as the previous value. We can, if we want to, set things to default, normal, bold. So if you want to just use a global kind of value, bold, and not worry about there being any kind of font weight, you could do exactly that. For this example though, we're going to set this to be 400 because I think that makes it nice and easy to read. Transform just means we can do things like put everything in uppercase, lowercase, capitalized, and so on. So for example, if we did uppercase, you can see everything is now capitalized. If we chose lowercase, everything is lowercase, so no capital letters at the beginning. If we chose something like capitalized, that'll put a capital letter at the beginning of every single word, which makes it very hard to read, but can work really nicely for headings. And we can also do normal or default. So we're going to leave that to default. As you can see, that just puts everything back to what it was. The style, normal, italic, and oblique. So if you wanted to italicize something, you could do that. We're going to leave, again, at default. And decoration is things like underline, overline, strike through, and so on. We'll leave that to default as well. The next 2 options we have are line height and letter spacing. Again, you can see you can set these specific to the device you may be viewing things on. So when we switch over and take a look at the other views, we'll take a look at how that impacts these as well. So when it comes to line height, you can see we've got pixels and M values on there as well. So we can adjust that to whatever we want to make sure everything looks nice and neat and makes it readable. And that's the key thing when you're working with this. When you're setting your font styles up, make sure that everything is nice, clear and readable for the end user on all the different types of devices you're going to be using. Letter spacing, that just allows you to adjust how much space is between each individual letter. Now generally for body text, I would normally leave that to 0 unless the font was a kind of weird looking font. However, for headings, you can get a lot more creative if you want to. Okay, so there's the basic value setup inside there. Now let's take a quick look at the size and the spacing and so on across the different types of devices. We can, if we want to, use the little icons here to switch between those different modes. Or we can come down and use the responsive mode switcher at the bottom of the left-hand panel. It's entirely up to you how you want to work. So what we're going to do first of all is adjust things on here for the font sizes. So let's just make sure that everything looks good on both desktop, tablets and mobiles. So we click, we'll change to tablet mode and the font size, everything looks pretty good on there. We'll switch over now to the mobile and everything looks pretty good on there too. So you don't need to make changes on everything. The options are there if you want to. So next up, let's just change the link colors. Let's switch this back to the normal mode. So we go back to desktop. And as you can see, we've got a link positioned in part of our text. So all we need to do is come to the link section and we've got normal and we've got hover. So let's just change the normal color. We're going to change that. We're going to change it to this blue color. We're also going to make it a little heavier. So we can adjust the color and we can adjust the typography. So let's just make that a little more solid so the link stands out. That already stands out a little bit better. And what you can also do is we can come in and we're going to say we're going to put some text decoration and we're going to underline this. So it looks a little bit more in keeping with the traditional looking link. Then we can jump over to the hover state. And if we don't make any changes on there, everything will stay exactly as it is when we hover over, which gives no kind of visual feedback. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that as well. So we're going to change that over and we're going to say this is going to go a reddish kind of color and we'll remove the underline. So we'll just simply come in to our decoration and we'll just set that to be none. So now when we hover over, you can see we now get visual feedback and we've controlled that. Now, so every link that's a normal link inside your text and so on will all pick up that natural styling. This also reflects, as you can see, up to the navigation at the top, unless we override it. Now, this is one of those little concepts that once you kind of understand what's going on with it, it'll help you move forward and make sure that you style things and set things up in the best possible way. Theme styles are a global change. So when you make something on there, everything that uses that particular styling will be updated throughout the entire site. So for example, like we just seen with the links, all links will be a blue underline and on a hover, they'll be red. However, you can change that, but you change it on a widget level. So what I mean by that is if you didn't want that to be the case with, for example, the heading, then you can style that differently inside the widget itself. And we'll take a look at that a little later when we take a look at making styling on the widget level. But just bear that in mind. If you make changes in the widget, typography, colors, and those kinds of things, that will override anything you set up inside the theme styles. So once you understand that, keep that in the back of your mind, you'll know that if you see a problem, that could be the reason why you've styled something inside the widget, and that's overriding your theme style. Now, I'm not going to go through and make you watch me style everything on here. You've seen how the styles work. You've seen how we can apply them. I'm now going to go ahead, apply the styling that I want to the headings 1 through 6, and then I'll come back and show you how we can make some changes to some of the other things like the forms, the buttons, and so on. It's all pretty much the same thing, but if you're not used to working with forms and things, there may be some options inside there that an explanation just could make the whole process a little easier. Obviously, if you're comfortable with this, you can skip over to the next section by using those timestamps in the description below. Okay, so there's my headings all styled up. Everything is looking nice and neat and tidy. Now let's take a look at how we can do things like the forms and buttons and so on. So we can click on the buttons. You can see we can adjust things like text color, typography, text shadow, and all those kinds of very useful things. But what we want to do is make sure that we've got the color scheme and everything set up so all our buttons look the same. Like the links, we've got normal and hover state, so we can adjust things on there. So let's quickly configure some of the basics. Let's choose our background color, and we're going to use this pale blue color, and you can see that immediately changes the button color. Text color, we're going to set that to be white to make sure it stays white all the time. And then we're going to come up to the typography, and from there we're just going to adjust a few things. So the first thing we want to do is just set this to be the same font as we're using, which is Quicksand. Size, we're going to adjust that to about 20 pixels, and we're going to set the weight to be 500, and we'll transform that to uppercase. So you can see, actually, let's just drop that down a little bit. It looks a bit too big. Okay, so you can see now we've configured some basic parameters on there. Jump into the hover state, and we can do the same thing there. So we can come in, choose our background color. We're going to make that a little darker, so it gets some kind of separation when you hover over it. And now because we've created a new color, and we want to use that maybe somewhere else in the site to have, everything consistent, we can simply click on this little plus, and that will add a new picked color. So we can click on there, that now adds that in. If we want to position it somewhere else, we can easily move that over. Now we've got our hover, and we've got our normal state for our buttons. Same again, we're going to come into our text and set that to white. Now when we hover over, you can see we get visual feedback on exactly what's going on. So there's the first part. Then we can come into our form fields if we want to, and we can adjust any of the form field information. And again, we can do all the same things. We can adjust the label, the field, the typography for normal and on focus. And focus just basically means when you click inside this particular form element, it changes slightly. You can see the outline is a little darker. Click on the next one and the next one. So you can adjust those kinds of things. So you can make any changes you want there, including, like I say, any font styling and so on, but we are still getting that flow of font styles down through the various different elements. So I'm going to leave everything else inside there as it is. And the final thing we could take a look at doing if we wanted to is setting up styles for the images. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. We can come back at a later time if we need to and set up any kind of global settings. Now, once we've configured those kind of elements all inside the theme style section, we can now hit update. That will now reflect those changes and save them for us. So now when we create new pages, templates, and so on, as long as we don't overwrite any of these settings on a widget level, these will now style all those various different elements throughout our entire site. And that is the very, very basics of how we use theme styles. But hopefully what you can see in this section is once you set these things up at the beginning, it makes it incredibly easy then to either make changes later on down the line or just to style everything you need to have that flow throughout your entire site and just speeds up the process of designing and styling everything. So in this section, we're now going to start taking a look at how we can build up our website, the various different components that make up both a page and also some of the key template files that we can assign to our entire site. Now, working with template files or theme files, if you want to call it that, just speeds up the process of creating various different parts. So for example, things like your header with your navigation and your logo, your footer with maybe contact information and things like that. You want to create those and assign those globally to your entire site, so you don't have to do that on every single page. Now, Elementor Pro makes this very, very easy. We can start to take advantage of the templating system or the theme files. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at building our header and our footer, and also take a look at things like blocks and templates and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into the template section on the left hand side, and we're going to come down into the theme builder. Now, don't be daunted or put off by the fact this calls it a theme builder. We're not going to be building an entire theme, but we are going to be creating some of the key components. So when we look at the theme builder, you can see we've got the theme builder tab, which is an overview of any of the theme files we may create now and moving forward. We've then got 4 key areas in which we can group things together: headers, footers, single, and archive. Now in this tutorial, this first part, we're not going to even touch the single and the archive. We'll look at those in their own dedicated tutorial on the theme builder. What we are going to look at though are the header and footer sections. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a header that's going to apply to our entire site. So we're going to click on header. Once we come into there, because we've got no theme files created, we're asked to create our first header. So what we're going to do is click on add new header. You can see it pulls up the choose template type option, but because we're already in the header section, it knows we're going to create a header. Next thing, we're going to name this. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this default header. Now, I just use the term default for anything that's going to be the standard theme file that's going to be used across our entire site. This doesn't limit you in any way. It just means when you come back and look at any of the theme files or templates you may create, they just have a logical kind of grouping. So with that being said, we're going to say create template. Once that's gone through, we're going to open up the Elementor editor and open up the library where we can choose from 3 different sections. Now, don't be worried about this. We're not going to go into tons of detail. This is just a quick and easy way of using these either as a starting point or as just something we want to take exactly as it is and then maybe make some changes just to pull in things like our own logo and so on. So what we have at the top, if we take a look, are blocks, pages, and my templates. Blocks are exactly as its name suggests, small block pieces that could make up an entire page. So for example, you can see we're currently looking at the header section. So all of these are basic templates for headers. If we come over to the left hand side, you can see we've got a drop down that allows us to go through and take a look at any of the other blocks. So what exactly are the use of blocks? Well, they've got a couple of different uses. If you want to use them to quickly prototype a design idea, you could pull in all different kinds of block pieces, create a page, create template files, create theme files. Use those then as a quick starting point. Go in and configure things to make them look a little bit more unique. Alternatively, you could just use things like headers and footers and ignore all of the other blocks. There's lots of different use cases. So, with that being said, we've got these different blocks. Under the pages section, if we jump over there, we've now got templates for pages. So these are, instead of being blocks where it's an individual piece, maybe like a hero or a header section or a footer section, these are entire pages. So you can see if we click on any of these, we've got the little magnifying glass so we can preview it. If you take a look, this is made up of an entire group of different sections to create an overall page. The only thing that's missing off these, with most of the templates at least, is the header and the footer, because they are a global element. Click back to our library, and if we wanted to, we can go through and take a look at all of these. You will find some more of the new designs are grouped together for various different types of pages and have an overall theme applied to them. And by a theme, I just mean a style. So you can see we've got this one for a photography portfolio kind of site. We've got a home page, an about page, a contact page, and so on. So these are all pages that all fall together under one design theme. You could pull those in and then adjust them to meet your own requirements. Then finally, we've got my templates. Now currently there's nothing in here because we haven't created any kind of template file whatsoever. However, if you start to create templates, they will be listed inside here, and every time you go in to either create a theme file or a normal page or post or so on, you can access your own template file. So this is a great way of being able to create reusable pieces and then just use those wherever you want in your page designs. For this though, we're going to stick with the blocks. So we're going to click on blocks and we're going to find a header that's in keeping with the clean style that we're going to use for this particular web design. So because most of our design is nice, clean, simple, white space, we're going to choose a header that's in keeping. So we've got a couple of different options we can choose from, and if we want to preview to see if it's going to be something we like, we can hover over, click the little magnifying glass and take a quick look. Now this one looks perfectly fine. We're only using this as a starting point and we can change any aspect of this should we want to. So what we're going to say is we're going to insert this, that will then insert this into the page for us, close out that browser and then allow us to start making changes. Now as you can see, we've got things happening here that don't make it look exactly the same as that preview did. You can see the get started looks a little bit weird. We've also got the home and the blog don't look exactly as we expected to. That's because these haven't been styled on the widget level. So they're picking up the global styling we just set up as part of the theme styles. So we can, if we want to, make changes to any of those aspects. This entire section is simply made up of normal Elementor widgets. So we can change anything we want. So let's do that. First of all, let's get rid of this button. We don't want that as part of our design. So we're simply going to click on this option that allows us to select the row, and then we can right click and we can just say delete. That will take that out of there and cleans that side of things up. If we come over now on the left hand side, we can get rid of this other column that's no longer needed. So we're going to click on there, right click, choose delete. And you can see that now puts our logo a little bit large and not necessarily where we want it to be. So we can make some adjustments there as well. We can select this particular object. So we're going to click and you can see edit site logo. So again, we're getting the context information on the left hand side. What we're going to do, position that over to the left. If you want to make any changes on there, you can do exactly that. We could jump over the style if you wanted to, and we can control the maximum width that's going to be displayed. So if we don't want this to be absolutely massive, we'll say we're going to keep this to something like the maximum size is going to be 55. We can do maximum width if you want to, width, whatever we want to do with it. Okay, so that being done, let's go to the right hand side. We're going to click on there, and this now is edit the nav menu. So now we can control exactly how the various different parts of this look. So we don't want this to be in this blue color with the underline. So we're going to jump over to the style tab. And from there, we're going to change things inside there. So we're going to come in and we can reset this back to defaults to make sure that we're not using any predefined styles, anything that's been set up in this widget as part of the template. So now if we want to, we can simply come in, change the text color. So we're going to set that to be this gray color. You can see that now changes. We can adjust that as well, just get everything we want. We can adjust any padding. We can come into our typography, and from there, we're going to say we want no decoration, and you can see that now immediately removes that underline. We're going to change the weight to make it a little heavier so they stand out a bit better. That looks pretty good. And we're going to transform this to be uppercase, and we're just going to drop the size of this down to about 15. Actually, let's make that 14. So you can see now we've adjusted this on the widget level, and that then overrides any settings we configure as part of those theme styles. Hopefully this is kind of making sense the way it's all going. Let's adjust the horizontal padding. Just tighten those up just a little bit. We'll set those to about 15. That looks better. And now if we want to, we can adjust the hover. So you can see if we come over it, nothing is really happening. So we're going to change the text color on there to this pale blue. When we hover over, we now get the pale blue effect. So we're starting to style things the way we want. Active, we're going to do the same inside there. We want to set the active state. And all that really means is, let's just say, for example, we were looking at the contact page. Then it would mean that in the navigation at the top, contact being the active page would be highlighted in whatever color we want. So we're going to set that to be this slightly darker blue. So we're keeping that theme styling. Everything is now nice and consistent. We've got everything the way we want. We've got a drop down in here at the moment, but we're going to take that off as part of the whole process. I've just got a couple of posts inside there we don't need. But if you wanted to style the drop down, you could do that inside here as well. And all the same kind of controls, the normal, the hover, the active, your text colors, background colors, and all those kinds of things are available to you. So you can style that any way you want. Okay, so final thing we want to do is select the entire section. And from there, we're going to come to style, and we're going to make sure that that border at the bottom is taken off. So we're going to simply set that to be 0. We have no border at the bottom. We can, if we want to though, we could apply things like drop shadows, whatever you kind of want to do to style this to make it unique. So what you've seen is we've used those block level elements, we've pulled that in, we've used that as the starting point, and then we've gone through and made changes to the way it all looks to make sure it's in keeping with the styling that we want to set up for our entire design. So these are great starting points, but we have full control over configuring every single aspect of them moving forward. Okay, so now we've set up the styling. Let's hit publish. And because this is a theme file, we need to apply a condition to it. And all the condition means is, when is this theme file going to be used? Because this is a header and it's going to be applied to the entire site, the condition is incredibly simple. All we do is click on add condition, and you can see the default option is include entire site. We can include or exclude. And we click on entire site, you can see we've got 3 options: entire site, archives, or singular. We're going to leave this to entire site, and we'll take a look at all these different options in a lot more detail in the dedicated tutorial to dealing with anything to do with building a theme with Elementor Pro. For now, we're going to keep this really simple and straightforward. So this now will apply to the entire site. So I'm going to hit save and close. That's now applied that. That header will be on every single page we have on the site right now, and also when we add new pages as we go through and build the site out. So now that we've completed the header, we can repeat the same process and create the footer. So let's just quickly do that. I'm not going to go through in the same amount of detail, but it's just going to show you how quick and easy it is. So we'll exit back out of this, back to our dashboard, back into our theme builder. This time we'll choose footer. We'll add a new footer and we'll name this default footer. Create our template. And from there, that'll take us into the browser. We can choose from all the blocks, pages, and templates. We're going to find something that I think is in keeping to this design, and we'll just pull this one in. So we're just going to insert this into our design. Once that's done, you can see that's pulled that in, and now if we want to, we can make changes to any of the styling on here. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this particular section. So delete that, and we're going to keep this really nice, plain, and simple. So there's our footer section. So we're going to hit publish, add our condition like we did, choose include entire site, and say save and close. That's our header and our footer created, adjusted, and applied to our entire site. So that's how we start to work with these basic template files and build out some basic elements for our theme. So now that the header and footer are in place, let's take a quick look at what this looks like inside our design before we move on and start creating our homepage. We can do that in a couple of ways inside Elementor when we're in the editor. We can simply close up the left-hand panel, and that will show us what the page will look like, and we can interact with all the different elements on the page. Or we can come down and we can choose the option that's like a little eyeball, click on there and say preview. That'll open up a new tab and show us what it'll look like in a clean, fresh browser. So now we've seen that, there's a couple of things I want to rectify on here. We can ignore this default footer and content area. Those are basically going to be ignored later on anyway. They're just sort of placeholders just to say that this is the content area. Let's close this down, come back in, and what we're going to do is, while we're currently editing the footer, if we see something in the header we want to make a change to, do we need to jump back out of this and then go back into the template for the theme file for the header? We used to have to do that, but now with the newer version of Elementor Pro, we get past that because we've got what's called inline editing. So if I come up over the header, you can see once I come over that, I now get a sort of orangey yellow box at the top that outlines the header and gives me the option to edit the header. Now if we click on that, we'll switch over and start editing the header. We're no longer editing any other template file, we're specifically working with the header. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this is separated. So we're going to click on it, click on the section, we're going to add in a little drop shadow at the bottom. So we're going to come to the style section, come down to border, and from there we're going to choose box shadow. I'm going to click on that, and you can see that now puts a faint shadow at the bottom. We can configure that in any way that we want to. So I'm going to make it a little lighter so it's a little more subtle. And once we've done that, I'm happy with the way it all looks. So with that in place, there's one more thing I want to do. Currently, this sort of fits the entire width of the page. I don't want that to happen. So again, making sure we've got the section selected, I'm going to come back out to our layout, and you can see currently it says content is full width. I'm going to select that and I set it back to be boxed. That will now make sure that as the page size grows, it will make sure that it only goes so far before it stays in place. And I just think that's a nicer way of working. So if we now just close this down, you'll see that now sits exactly where I want it to and stays in line with the way that the footer is currently set up. Let's come back out of that. We'll hit update. And now when I want to go back to carry on editing the page that I was originally working on, all I need to do is come back down to that section, in this example, the footer, and you can see the footer is now in yellowy orange, says edit footer. We click back on that, and now we're back to editing the actual original page or template file or theme file that we were working with. So that's what I wanted to show in this particular part. We're now ready to move on and start building out our first page, knowing that our header and footers are already in place. So what we're going to do, we can click and come out of this, exit to our dashboard, and we're simply going to go back into our pages, go to all pages, and we're going to create a new page called homepage. I'm going to click on that. We're going to name this homepage, and then we're going to publish this. I'm going to say edit with Elementor. Once you go back into the Elementor editor, we're now ready to start building things. So the first thing I want to do is get rid of this really ugly homepage title at the top. We don't want that. This is something that's part of the template for the single page. We can get rid of that by simply coming into settings in the bottom left hand corner, and where it says the option to hide title, we just enable that. Now with our title gone, we're ready to start building that page. So taking all of the skills that we've learned so far, it's very easy now to start building things up because we know that everything is working in rows and columns. We've got widgets we can drop in, and we can build the various different parts of our page out from there. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because the process is more a case of how do each of the sections work and what can we configure inside there, as opposed to how does Elementor work. So the first thing we want to do is add a new section at the top. So we're going to click to add a section, and we're going to put in this single row column section. Click on that. That now positions that at the top of our page, and we're now ready to go through and start configuring what goes on with that, how it works, and how we style it. So let's take a little look. We've got it selected. We're going to come over now, first of all, and take a look at the layout options, and from there we're going to configure some basic values. What we're going to do is we're going to just come down until we get to the height option. Now currently it's set to default. We're going to use this as sort of nice slider image section at the top to draw attention to what's going on the page and the kinds of things that we do as an architect in this example. I'm going to change that, and we're going to set this to have a minimum height. So we're going to click on there, and that now opens up some additional options. You can also see that the outline, the blue outline, has started to change based upon the value that's currently set as default, which is 400 pixels. Now you can see we've got that same option to adjust this for the different types of devices you may be looking at, so desktops, tablets, and mobiles. We've also got the options for a pixel value, VH and VW. We've then also got the value we want to use. So we're going to set this to be 650 pixels. So we have a nice, really nice looking header at the top that's going to display some of the work that this particular architect has worked on. We've then got column position. Now it depends if you want to put content into this. We're not putting content in there. We're just putting some images as a background. So we don't need to worry about configuring anything inside these options. We can jump onto the style section, and from the style section, this is where we can now configure things. So currently you can see we've got background is set to normal. We can also set the hover, so we can have a different background or different effect based upon when we mouse over this section or not. What we want though are one of these four options underneath. We've got classic. If we click on there, we can either choose a color or an image. We can click on gradient, or we can create a gradient effect if we wanted to. We've also got video, so we could drop a video into the background if you wanted to use one, and we can use things like YouTube or Vimeo. You could even use a file that's located on your own system as well, as in on the server. What we want though is slideshow, and this allows us to create a nice slideshow at the top of our page. We have no images currently selected, so we now need to go in and configure this and set up some images you want to use. So what we're going to do is click on this plus. We have no images uploaded at the moment, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload some images that I've already sized, ready to start working. So I'm going to drag and drop these images up, let those upload, and we're going to pull in the sliders that we want to use. So this is the first slider image that we have, and what we're going to do is we're just going to call this building 1. It's always good to make sure you put some alt text in there that relates to what's actually being used. Now we're going to uncheck all these other options because I don't want to use those inside here, because we're dealing with a sort of gallery, a sort of slider background kind of thing. We can select multiple different images. Next up, we're going to choose this second image, and we're just going to call this building 2. So like I say, good for SEO purposes. And we're just going to say create a new gallery. So I'm going to click on that, and we say insert gallery, and you can see now our images are placed into the background. These will transition through based upon the settings that are now set underneath. So you've got things like infinite loops. In other words, this will constantly keep going around between all the different images inside this particular section. The duration is basically how long each image will stay on screen. Transition, you can see we can do things like slides, we can do things like fade. So it's up to us to do exactly what we want there. So you can see we've got slide up, that'll wait for the 500 milliseconds, or 5,000 milliseconds I should say, and then adjust. Put that back to fade, I prefer that. Transition duration, as its name suggests, how long the transition of the fade lasts. So you can configure anything else you want on there, but I'm going to leave that as is because, like I say, this is the focus of this particular part of the page. I'm going to come down underneath now, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop in another new section. So we're going to click to add a section. This time we want to drop in a 3-column section. So we're going to click on that. That's dropped in our 3 columns, but we want to make a bit of space above and below just to give this some breathing space. So we're going to select the section, come over to our advanced section, and from there we can now adjust the different values for padding and margins and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in and unlink these, which means we can set the values independently. And we're going to set the first one to be 100 for the top and 100 for the bottom. So it gives us lots of nice breathing space around all the different parts of our site, or our section. We're also going to jump back into the layout, and we're going to change the column gap. Now the column gap, as its name suggests, is how much space is given between each of these individual columns. We don't want things to be squished up next to each other, so we can control that very easily. So we're going to come in and we're going to say we want this to be extended. That just gives us a bit more space around the outside edges of our content. Now speaking of our content, what are we going to put in here? Well, first of all, we're going to simply drag in a heading widget. I'm going to drag and drop that into this first section. We're also going to come back and select a text editor. So we're going to drop that into that section. So we've now created 3 columns. We've put in our header. We've put in our content. Now obviously at the moment this header just looks way too big, and obviously the text isn't what we want to say. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that text first of all, so we can select it, and now we can edit it in one of 2 ways. We can edit it on the page itself by selecting it and just typing in what we want, or we can use this section on the left hand side and do exactly the same thing. So we'll do that for the first one. And as you can see, we've now put our text in, but it still looks too big. So what I'm going to do is, using the power of that theme style that we've set up, we're going to change the HTML tag. So at the moment it's set to H2, we're going to set this to H4. So now the easiest way of replicating this is to simply come over, select duplicate, and then we can just drag and drop that over. Do the same again, we can duplicate, and we can drag and drop that over there as well, and then just make the changes that we want. So all we need to do is click, and we're just going to change this now to the second heading. Super easy. And then finally we could do the same thing again. Now there's a couple of things you could do. Let's just take this column out. Let's just delete that. We now set this to be 2. What we could do is we're not just limited to duplicating widgets. We can duplicate the layout options as well. So for example, we want to add in another column that's going to look exactly the same as the other two. So what we could do is just right click on the column and then just say duplicate. We now have not only a duplicate of the column, but also a duplicate of the content in that column. So it's very easy. There's lots of different ways in which you can tap in and make the whole process of editing what you're doing just so much easier. So let's just finally put in the information for that final one. And we've created the first section at the top of our page and also the 3 key points of what our business is all about. So we've got one more section to add into the site now, and that's basically our little bit of a portfolio kind of thing to draw attention to some of the projects we've currently been working on. So we're going to click to add that in. Add a new section in. Once you've got that section in place, we can come over and we're going to just choose the gallery option. Now recently, Elementor Pro released the Gallery Updated plugin, which just gives it a lot more functionality over the original one, which really was quite poor. So thankfully, we now have a lot more control over how things look. So let's just drag that widget into place. And now we can come in and choose exactly what images are going to be used inside here. So what we can do is we can click to add in either single or multiple galleries. We're going to keep this simple and just use the single option. So we're going to click. Now, one of the nice things about this gallery is it doesn't matter too much if your images are not all the same aspect ratio. So I'm going to choose 6 images, most of which have the same aspect, but one that doesn't. So we're going to say create new gallery. We'll insert that gallery. And this will pull the information in now. And as you can see, everything looks nice and neat and all in line and matching. That's because this new gallery version has a lot more control over exactly how the images are going to be displayed, which gives us a lot more creative freedom to not worry about the aspect ratio of images. So let's take a look at some of the options. We can lazy load if we want to, and all that really means is that they won't load the images in until the user scrolls down the page and kind of triggers this section on the site. They will then fade in. This helps speed up the load time on any page that you're working with, so it is something that can be very, very useful. We'll leave that as is. We'll leave the lazy load on there. We've then got the layout, and you can see we've got 3 options: grid, justified, and masonry. Currently, the grid option does exactly what its name suggests. It creates a nice grid, and it will then set the aspect ratio for each of those images to make sure everything looks nice and neat. Justified will kind of do a slightly different thing. You can see we've got different aspect ratios, but it makes sure that everything fits into the layout and looks great. So if you are dealing with various different size and shape images, this is a great option to make sure that your galleries look really, really nice. The third and final option is masonry, which does a similar kind of thing, but doesn't respect the sort of the shape of them as much. You can see this bottom one drops down a little underneath, so it kind of looks at the overall and then doesn't worry about the bottom row, as it were. Let's set this back to be the grid option because I want everything to be the same. So we're going to set that to grid so they all match up. Columns, we're going to change that from 4. We're going to set it to 3 so it just looks a little nicer and we've got bigger images to look at. Now, speaking of the images, they do look a little bit pixelated and a little bit low quality. That's because currently we're using the image size of medium, which is 300 by 300 pixels. So let's just change that. Now, depending upon how you've got your WordPress configured, you may see different values inside here, but just a normal WordPress, you should have thumbnail, medium, large, and full. We're going to set this to be medium large, and you'll see that now increases the quality of those, but obviously also increases the file size a little bit. We're going to adjust the spacing so we get a bit more of a gap around each of these different images. We'll set that to about 30 pixels. That looks quite nice. And what we can do then, we can control what these images link to, and also the aspect ratio that's being displayed. So the link by default is going to go to the media file. You could change it to none, so you can't click on these. They're just literally there to show you those different images. You can choose the media file, which is the default, or a custom URL. We'll leave it to media file, and then that'll open it up inside a nice light box effect. The aspect ratio, as you can see, we can configure that any way we want to. 3:2 looks quite nice, but you could, if you want to do 4:3, it would then refresh those and change the size and aspect ratio accordingly. You could do something like 1:1 if you wanted to make sure they're all nice and square. Entirely up to you, and just let your creative juices flow on that. We're going to set that back to 3 by 2. That looks pretty nice. If you want to, you can apply an overlay. So you can see when you mouse over them, it does this overlay effect, which is nice if you are offering the ability to click and it opens up. That's pretty cool. You've also got the option to have either text go over there or just leave it as is. Now, default is it will just create a hover effect with nothing else. However, you could set the title and the description. You can see if we click to expand those out, we've got title, caption, alt, description, and so on. So each image, when you upload it to your media library, you can put things like alt text, descriptions, and so on. That would then use that data if you include it when you hover over. Entirely up to you if you'd want to use something along those lines. So there's one final thing I want to do now for our gallery, and that's put a title on there just so people know exactly what this is all about. So it's just a list of our current projects. So all we're going to do is come over, we're going to choose to drop a heading in above our gallery, and we're just going to put in the title of our current projects, and we'll set that to be H3, which fits in quite nicely with the sizing. Once we hit update, all those changes now are committed. So what we can do is we can take a look at this on our page and see how this home page interacts with the header and footer that we've just configured as part of our theme. So let's click to preview this, and you can see there's our header section. We'll let that transition between the two images so you can see it in action. We scroll down, there's our 3 columns, there's our gallery lazy loading, and if we click, you can see it opens it up now in a nice light box. Now there are a couple of things that we want to sort out. First of all, we haven't taken a look at how this will look on mobile devices and tablets, so we need to rectify that. We also see that we are a little bit too close to the footer section. So again, all these things are incredibly easy to rectify. Let's close this down and go back into Elementor. We're going to grab this section, which is our portfolio section. We're going to click on that, come into the advanced tab, and all we're going to do is unlink the padding options, and we're going to apply 100 pixels at the bottom. This then gives us a nice amount of white space underneath our gallery for the footer. So that's the first part. So next we need to go and make sure this looks good on all those different devices. So let's click to open up responsive mode, and we'll start off with the tablet. Now changes we make on the tablet mode will flow down to the mobile. So it's always worth bearing in mind some things you can change in tablet and will work perfectly on mobile, and vice versa. You might see sometimes you have to make changes in the mobile to be specific to a mobile device. So let's take a little look. Our header section looks okay, maybe a little on the large side. Plus we've also got our navigation hamburger menu, looks a little bit out of place there, being sort of stuck in there. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But let's just deal with the page, and then we'll worry about the header and footer. So we're going to click to edit this section, and what we're going to do is we're going to come out to our layout, and we're going to adjust our minimum height. So at the moment, we've got minimum height, and it's just picking up the value from the desktop. Let's adjust that to make it a bit more in keeping. So let's just say something like about 360 pixels. That looks quite nice on a tablet. We scroll down then where we've got this area. The gap is probably a little too big at the moment. So we're going to come into our advanced section, and we're going to adjust this now. So we're going to unlink these values. So we're going to set the top. We'll try 50 in there and 50 in the bottom. That looks a little bit better. If we wanted to adjust these, we could adjust these as well. So let's just say we want to adjust the size of this. So we can easily come in and we could change that to something like H5 if we wanted to, or we can leave it at H4, and we can come to the style tab and we can adjust it on the widget level. So we could say, let's come into typography. So we keep that hierarchy of the heading, and we just adjust the size for this particular layout. So we'll adjust that, we'll set that to 15. Actually set it to 14, because we might find we'll have a problem with the next one. We'll do the same then underneath. We'll just click on this, and we're just going to come into our style tab, come into our typography, and we'll adjust the size of that ever so slightly. We'll also adjust the line height just to tighten things up there so it looks a little better on this kind of device. Okay, so we've now adjusted that so it looks better on a tablet. We've got to go through the same process now for the other two. Now instead of having to do it manually, there is a quick and easy way to do it. If we right click on any of these widgets, so this example we've got the little text widget, we're going to copy, we're going to come out of the text widget in the next one, we're going to right click and we're going to say paste style. And you can see that now picks up the style. We can do the same for the next one, so paste style again. We can do the same for the heading, we can right click on it, we can copy, come out to the next heading, paste style, and the same on the next one, paste style. So we can easily adjust those to make sure that everything is in keeping the way that we want. Obviously, you spend a little bit more time adjusting this to make sure everything fits perfectly, but it gives you an idea of how things work. So finally, we're going to come over now into our little portfolio section. We're going to choose this heading and we're going to do the same again. We're going to come into the style section and we're simply going to adjust the size of that so it's a little bit more in keeping with the visual hierarchy that we've got throughout our site. So that will now override that, but only on this tablet version. If we come down and select the gallery, we come to our settings, and from there we're going to say we're going to adjust this. So we might say we want to still have 3 columns on there, so it all kind of fits a little bit better. And finally, we're going to come into the advanced tab, and from there we're going to adjust the bottom spacing. I'm going to set that to be 50 now, and we'll hit update. That's our tablet version modified. Finally, we're going to come in and choose our responsive mode for mobile. Click on there and you can see now things have changed again. And the nice thing is, because we're using Elementor widgets, a lot of the control over how things resize and change and stuff like that is kind of controlled on that level. So there's a lot of things that are already done for us in the background. However, we can still adjust things. So where we've kind of gone over now to this layout, we need to adjust the header still. Start off though with this slider section. So again, you can see this is probably a little too big. We'll adjust that a bit more in keeping. We'll set that to about 200. I don't mind the spacing on the rest of it. That looks okay. But what I do want to do is change the alignment. So these now sit centered. So we're going to click on the heading. And what we're going to do is come over to the content, set the heading. So set that to be centered and do the same then underneath. So we'll set that to be centered. And we can use the same trick again. We can right click, copy, right click, paste style, right click, paste style. So it's a quick and easy way of being able to quickly style one thing and then not have to go through the whole process of doing it every single time. So everything else looks okay on the page. That looks pretty good being a single section. Obviously, we can adjust anything we want to on there. So the final thing we need to take a look at now is the header section. So before we make any more changes, let's update that so we can save everything we've done on this page. And let's just use that inline editing now where we switch over to start working with the header. So let's switch it back first of all over to tablet mode. Let's edit the header. Let's choose this option now. We can just configure the way that everything works on here. So you can see we've got this empty section over on the right hand side that we want to kind of deal with. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that column and we're going to set that to be 50%. And there you go. That now positions that over on the right hand side correctly. If we switch over now to mobile view, we can do the same thing again. So what we can do is we can click on that. This time we're going to set that to be 70. Just so we have a little bit more room because the logo's a bit on the small side there. And again, like I say, we can adjust any of the aspects of this to make sure everything sits perfectly. Hit update. And we've now gone through and configured the header, the footer, the content for all the different types of devices. So let's just switch back to desktop. And as you can see now, everything sits the way you'd expect it to. Switch over to tablet, it adjusts. Switch over to mobile, it adjusts again. So we've configured all 3 different types of devices very quickly and very easily, all inside the Elementor editor. So with this section, we're going to take a quick look at how we can create another page. This example is going to be the contact page. So I've already gone ahead and created a normal blank page inside WordPress, and we're now ready to open up Elementor to start creating the content. So once we've opened that up, first thing we're going to do is come down to the settings section and disable that title like we did before. Next up, we're going to put in the first section, which is going to be, in this example, the map to the location of the business. So what we're going to do, click back to our widgets, and we're going to use a Google map. Now, because we know this is going to be a single row column, I could, if I wanted to, click and add a new section, or I can just drag the Google map up, drop it over this little box. You can see it now goes blue. I can let go, and it now knows what I want to do is just basically drop that into the page. So there we go. There's the first part of it done. Now we just need to set up some styling, set up some different parameters and so on. So first thing we're going to do is select the section, take a look on the left-hand side. First thing, get rid of those column gaps. So we're going to click on that and say no gap. Once we've done that, we're going to say we want the content to be full width. So this is going to span the entire full width of the page, no matter how big it is. Click on that. You can see that now goes up to the edges. Now to keep this in keeping with the front page where we had this header section with the images set to 650 pixels high on the desktop, we're going to do the same thing on here. Making sure that we've got the actual widget selected this time, we're going to set the height to 650 pixels. You can see now the container, the section, will automatically adjust for the size we set up in there. So we don't need to set the height of this. That's being dictated by the actual widget inside there. Next, we're going to set this up to be 14 on the zoom level, so we're a little bit closer to the location of this particular business. So there's the first part of it done. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop in another section that puts in the address, contact details, and a contact form. So let's click to add in a 2-column widget. So we're going to click, choose this 70/30 layout. I'm going to click on that, choose the section, come in like we did before, and just apply 100 pixels padding at the top and the bottom, just to give us that nice space around things. So first thing we're going to do is drop in the contact forms. We're going to come back onto our widgets, scroll down until we get to our form, drag and drop that inside there. You can see this still picks up that styling we set up earlier on as part of the overall theme style, so that's nice to see. But we can now go in and configure the various different aspects of this form. Before we do, let's set this section, this column. We're going to come in and we're just going to put a bit more spacing around that. So we're going to just come in, we'll set that to be linked, and we'll try 50 pixels. Oh, not 500, 50 pixels. That'll do. That looks quite nice. Let's choose our actual form element. We're going to remove those labels. I'm going to come in now and we're just going to set up some other things. Now I'm not going to make this form all work. That's not what we're going to cover in this particular section. This is more about just the basics of building your pages and the fundamental skills involved. Let's adjust this with some row gaps. Let's set that to about 25. That's looking pretty good. So there's the first part. Now what we're going to do is come over, we're going to grab a text editor, drop that into the right hand side, and we're just going to put in the address. So let's just drop the text inside there. There we go. What we're going to do now is make sure that this all sits nice and neat and tidy. So you can see we've got padding on this section, but we don't have it on here. So we can deal with that in a couple of different ways. We could add some padding in there if we wanted to, or we can just set this column to come in and set that to be middle. So it's up to us exactly how we want to style this. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this section and we're just going to put a little bit of a border around this, a little bit of a drop shadow maybe, just to make it stand off the background. But obviously you could get creative in any way you wanted to. So let's just choose a border. We're going to set this to be solid. We'll set it to be a very pale grey. And then we'll set this to be 1 pixel with a border radius of, let's just say something like 8. I think that may be a little darker so it stands out a bit better. There we go. So we've now created a little border section around there. We can hit update, and that's the basics of our contact page all set up. So again, we can just click to preview the changes on there. There's our map. If we scroll down, there's our contact form, there's our text for our address and so on. Obviously, there's a ton of things we could do to this. There's one more thing I want to show you before we close this down. Let's just say we want to add a little bit of animation to this. Let me make a bit of breathing space on there first of all. So we'll just come in, padding on the left hand side, and we'll set that to be 20 just so it stands off there. Actually, let's set that to be 50. There we go. Let's just say we wanted to animate some of these aspects to come in on the page. We could select this section, come into advanced, and we come into motion effects. Now we can, if we want to, create an animation for the entrance animation. So just click and we'll just say fade in right. Click on that, you can see it fades in from the right. Or we can come in and say fade in left. It'll fade in from the left hand side. We could set the right hand column to do the opposite if we wanted to. So we can do motion effects, come in and we're just going to say slide in or fade in left or fade in right. So now let's just preview this page. And we'll find that those aspects, as we scroll down, they animate in from the left and the right hand side. Let's refresh that so you can see it properly. There we go. So we can easily add different animation effects in should we want to give the page just a little bit of life. But hopefully what you've seen is it's not complex to start working with Elementor and Elementor Pro. So that's where we're going to wrap up this first part in this series on working with Elementor. Hopefully what you've seen is it's not as complicated as you may have first thought, and you should now be comfortable creating your first pages and ultimately your first simple WordPress website using Elementor as your page builder. So we've covered a lot of core fundamental skills, including touching upon theme files. So hopefully this has whet your appetite for what's to come in the next videos. Now don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash the bell icon to be notified as soon as new content is released on the channel. And if you want to find out more, there's applicable links are all in the description below. Some of those are affiliate links, and if you use those, it costs you absolutely no more money, but it does give a small percentage back to the channel and help me create more content like this for you moving forward. As always, my name's been Paul C. This has been WPTuts. Until next time, take care.